Welcome, Jack London neighbors and friends, and it's terrific to see this great turnout. We're so thrilled to have a great panel tonight. So the vision of this event, and hopefully this is the first of many, is to start a conversation about the type of neighborhood we want to be. And tonight we have here Pamela Kershaw, Director of Commercial Real Estate with the Port of Oakland. we can applaud for them at the very end. We have Robert Ogilvie, who is the director of SPUR Oakland. Is that the correct the Oakland director for SPUR? And for those of you who don't know, SPUR is started as the San Francisco Planning and Urban Research and is now called SPUR. And now we have a brand new Oakland office. Doors will be opening soon. Rachel Flynn, who's the director of planning. Kelley Kahn, is that correct? With the city of planning and building with the city of Oakland. Kelley Kahn, who is the project director with the city administrator's office at the city of Oakland. And John King, who is urban design critic with the San Francisco Chronicle. And we're incredibly honored to have this illustrious panel, and thank you all for coming. I'll hand this over to John. Oh, and I'm sorry, I should introduce myself. My name is Savlan Hauser. I'm director of the Jack London Improvement District. So welcome.
Okay, I want to echo that. I'm amazed at how many people are here, which it's a testimony to people caring about public policy and planning and your neighborhood. I grew up in the Bay Area in Walnut Creek, and so I am old enough that I remember when Jack London Square was new and it was going to put this area on the map. And I remember going here once or twice with my parents and not going again. And I kind of remember things coming and going, and my wife and I moved back, and Jack London, by then it was Jack London Waterfront. It had been redone, and it was poised to take off, and it didn't. And then since 2001, I've been writing about urban design for the Chronicle. I was at the Chronicle before doing other things, and have watched the real interesting transition that is still very much going on, and going on more so, of this remarkably situated place that part of what makes this area so interesting is it's this kind of isolated thing unto itself. It's not Alameda. You don't go through a tube to get there. But you're very physically isolated in a lot of ways, a lot of good ways. And there's such an interesting mix of uses that it's still wholesale. It's residential, it's office, it's fragments of the port, it's light industry. But the fact that there's this real interesting mix also means, and I'm the outsider who still comes in here, I live in Berkeley, so I like to bicycle down to the farmers market and things. But it's this interesting neighborhood where it's great that nothing predominates, but the fact that nothing predominates means there aren't enough residents for the kind of retail that some people would like. There's not enough of a population base for the waterfront retail to take on the life that keeps being imagined for it, and other things like that. So that's why I think it's one reason I accepted this invitation beyond the quality of the panel was just a chance to talk about how, there's so many interesting facets to this neighborhood. There's been such interesting growth and progress in the last 10, 20 years. What is the neighborhood today, both unto itself and within Oakland and even the region? And then how do you nurture it to bring along? So let me just explain the way we'll do this. I'm going to ask each of the panelists an individual question, let them talk for a few minutes. Then we'll have a conversation for 20 minutes or half an hour or so. Then we will go to questions from the audience. And the idea with it is a conversation about the neighborhood rather than peppering Pam with, why did that truck drive down the street at 5:55 on the way to the port when everyone knows it's not supposed to before 6? Or Rachel and Kelley, how did you allow this to happen and why didn't you stop that? In other words, that's what after the discussion is for you to pigeonhole everyone you want, or to pigeonhole me on why the paper came late. So what we'll just do now is kind of start with the questions, and I'm just going to walk down this order. So first I want to start with Kelley, who I know pretty well from when she was at the redevelopment agency in San Francisco, kind of trying to will Mission Bay into existence, which is a waterfront district about as different from Jack London as can be in many different ways. But so my first question for you would be, how do you, the view from City Hall, kind of spurring on growth and stimulating growth within Oakland, how does City Hall look at Jack London Square in this district, both as a district unto itself and as the connection of the city to this remarkable piece of the waterfront? Just kind of how do you begin to get your arms around something like that?
Well, that's an interesting question. Like you, I grew up in the area. I've been coming to this district since I was a little girl. We used to eat at the spaghetti factory all the time, if you remember that, which we loved. And I'm sort of sad it's not there for me to take my 5-year-old son to now. But it's sort of interesting. So I've been with the city of Oakland for about 1.5 years. I worked for the city of San Francisco for a long time on a couple waterfront developments, Mission Bay for quite a long time, 300 acres of brand new construction. And then after that, for a waterfront project known as Pier 70, which is much earlier in the process, which you may have read about. It was just on the ballot in San Francisco, and it was approved by the voters to do a mixed-use development right literally on the water, 65 acres. That's a fabric that actually has a lot of historic buildings. There's a lot of industry there that's remaining, but we wanted to bring housing and office. So I've done a lot of thinking about these different types of landscapes, right? So where Mission Bay, it was all about investment, new construction. The University of California went in there. There was very little historic fabric to save. What was there, we did save, but it was one building and a couple bridges. And I'm very proud and pleased with what Mission Bay has become for San Francisco. There's a biotech cluster now in San Francisco where there was not one. There wasn't a single biotech company in San Francisco until we did that development. We also got to experiment with a lot of different architectural styles. But there's something about a fabric that is all new construction that takes a while to get a patina. And when I had the chance then to work on Pier 70, where from the get-go we were leading with the preservation of existing assets, trying to come up with a land use program that combined, that was actually sensitive to the fact that we wanted to retain a bit of industry, and where do you place the housing then relative to the ship repair facility that is literally on the same property. So I was sort of playing with those ideas, and when I took the job in Oakland, one of the reasons I took it is I felt like kind of the things we were trying to create in San Francisco in Mission Bay or Pier 70 by design is sort of already happening fairly organically and sort of authentically in Oakland. And I would offer that the Jack London neighborhood, this neighborhood, so from the freeway to the water, is sort of an example of the direction I'd like Oakland how I'd like to see Oakland grow and change over time. And I say that because of what you've already talked about is the rich mix of uses, which I think we need to work to really retain. The fact that you have historic buildings, you have some retail, you have restaurants, you now have housing coming in, you have manufacturing. We're now growing one of our big sectors of our economy, the solar power, clean tech economy is really taking hold here in Jack London in the district. So I think for me, in a way, what's happening here is really how I'd like to see Oakland change more generally, where we preserve what is so strong and so interesting and so authentically Oakland, but we also allow for the new development that brings the people and the jobs, that creates money to improve parks, money for transit, money for all the things that we need to do, even for affordable housing. So that's, I guess, kind of a very big picture answer to your question. I think there is a lot of work to be done about how inviting the waterfront is. I still feel like it's not quite there, that there's been so much development on this waterfront and it's such a lovely experience, but its legibility as you're walking down Broadway or walking down any of the streets to the water isn't quite there yet. I think it's still maybe a little bit too auto-oriented at the end of Broadway when you get there and when you get to the water. So I think maybe that Rachel can pick up on that theme, but I think there's some urban design issues to better opportunities to connect the water and Oakland, and this is the place it should happen, in this neighborhood.
And Rachel, that would be the question I would have is, from the planning perspective and the building perspective, there's the physical isolation. I took the shuttle here, which has been, I think, a great improvement, but still there's that kind of last, you go under the freeway, you go by the jail. I mean, it's just a big barrier. The train tracks, certainly on the weekends, are a different sort of barrier. The ragged edges of the waterfront are part of the charm, but it's also the ragged edges, how it just kind of peters out in different directions. You want to put in development, but you don't want development that overwhelms what's there. And so how do you sort through these issues? It's
a good question. I think it shows that you really need to integrate all the pieces. You can't just look at transportation like we've been doing since post-World War II, where they were treated more like utilities. You just want to get cars through. You have to look at street design as an integral part to your city and how that affects land use. And when the freeway went in, it just did great harm to the city, like it's done in most cities in America. So now that it's there, unless we have an earthquake that brings it down, maybe, or if we can get a big dig like Boston did. But short of that, that freeway is here to stay, and we have to work with it. And I think through design, we're going to have to figure out how to make it less imposing. We're going to have to incorporate elements to, in some ways, make it disappear, and use art and use lighting and use planting and other means to allow for a welcoming and safe underpasses. When you come off and there are these ramps going every which way, they're just not great gateways to this area. And if you want to have a tourist, entertainment, retail destination that's not based on residents, which is what I think the original intention was, then every way into it has to be beautiful and inviting and feel safe. And that just hasn't happened. A lot of well-meaning intentions, but we just aren't there. So I would make that a #1 priority. And then you've got, the assets with the water, with the historic architecture, being downtown, and its uniqueness. I think because of that character, people really want to be here. So if we can figure out this transportation piece, we're working on the land use piece with now some new residential, because retail follows rooftops. So if we can't be like a Pier 70 and a standalone tourist destination, I think we still got to work on that, but we also have to rely on new residents. And that was why 2 of the recent rezonings happened, to get more residents down here, more 24/7 life, safer, more people on the street, greater investment. So those are some of the things I would start with to try and change the area.
Now, Robert, you are representing the group SPUR that I guess in January will be setting up shop here. You've been a professor at Berkeley in urban planning issues and urban development and all. Could you fill a little bit in, what's it like, I mean, as familiar as you are with Oakland and this part of the East Bay, how do you almost assess an area like this? Why is SPUR coming to Oakland, but then also how do you start to look at this piece of Oakland and start to think about, City Hall has its own visions of what it would like to see happen. What's almost the more organic way coming up?
There's a lot of questions in there. I could
Pick
sort of
one of
say
them.
almost anything I want. Well, SPUR's coming to Oakland because a big chunk of our membership is in the East Bay. We're a membership organization, been around since 1910. And I think the board in San Francisco realized, it took them a while, but that San Francisco is an ever-shrinking part of the greater Bay Area, and Oakland's the center. Oakland is certainly the geographic center, and we're talking about Jack London Square, but if we go a little bit beyond that to the port, which we're going to talk about as well, it's really a big part of the commercial and transportation heart and connection to the world economy. So SPUR's coming to Oakland because we believe in cities and in vital cities, and we believe that cities drive the region. And that's why we went to San Jose, and that's why we're coming to Oakland. But John, about the sort of, I don't know, let me sort of rephrase your question. I have seen many examples of places akin to Jack London Square elsewhere in the world. Vancouver's Granville Island, which I'm very familiar with, having grown up in Canada, where again, they've got the same sort of challenge with the freeways up above, slightly different. In this case, it's more of a bridge in Vancouver, and the urban infrastructure and how to mix the residential and the artisan economy that's growing up around Oakland and the light industrial. They haven't done a perfect job. I think they've sort of lost some of the residential, which God knows we don't want to do here, because Oakland, I think, needs more residential. But I think that we still have, as Kelley and you have identified, John, so many little pieces of things that are so good. And the challenge is to learn from elsewhere, but to bring the voices together in the table, and that's what SPUR likes to do as a forum, to help incrementally move our way forward. I think Jack London is starting to do very well with this incremental change, and I think that is the real challenge, is to maintain the incremental forward movement. I love some of Rachel's ideas about what to do with the freeway, given that the big dig is not probably going to happen in the East Bay, although I kind of wish it would. And move forward incrementally, step by step, positive step.
And Pam, everyone in the crowd may know this, but is there a point at which the growth and prosperity of the Jack London waterfront area would start to impede the port as a very large port on the West Coast? You were saying the second largest. Or are those really separate worlds?
Yeah, I think the port's thrilled to have the Jack London district thriving and new development coming in, as well as old buildings and development prospering. You know, this transportation, the seaport industry that we're in, the maritime industry, is a global industry. The seaport in Oakland is unlikely to move anytime soon. There's very few places on the globe, and even fewer on this country, with 50 feet of water depth, which is what a normal, a modern shipping line takes now. They have drafts that require 50 feet of dredged area. So with that being said, kind of in that not leaving, I really don't think the residential or any of the other developments in the district are having anything but a positive impact on the port's operations, both in the commercial area where I work in Jack London Square. It's certainly a huge a boon to us. We're thrilled. Or in the seaport operations. I really think the heart of our seaport is located closer to the Bay Bridge. Any of you who are interested in learning more about the Port of Oakland, I'd love to talk to you about it. We're very proud of what we do. We run the airport as well. I'm going to give a plug for the Port of Oakland. We've got fascinating business lines and lots of cool things to talk about in that end, but I really think development is a great friend to the port, and we're thrilled with what's happening in the district. I also think my colleagues at City Hall have done a very good job of trying to navigate the development pressures going on thus far, and I agree that some of the things that we struggle with are the transportation networks and how to move people around efficiently and get places quickly and make that work so we all benefit from it.
Yeah, a question for all of you to kind of get more of the conversation going. We're talking about the Jack London district. If you kind of step back and almost look at it as an urban geographer, the district we're talking about that theoretically you all live in or work in, is named after a real estate exercise dating back to the 60s or 70s, which was to kind of create an East Bay fisherman's wharf on the water. I don't know how many of you have been around that long. This is what I was referring to as a kid was, I know Paul Groth is here, who's a UC Berkeley urban design professor or whatever, Worcester Hall. I mean, it's kind of fascinating. You look at the history of American planning, and there are all these big ideas that don't work, where there's something that's good and then it's replicated and it doesn't work anywhere else. And one was the vogue in the 70s of the, let's kind of recreate Carmel and European old neighborhoods as shopping centers. I grew up in Walnut Creek. Concord had the Willows that has struggled on. Mountain View had one that was torn down in the late 90s. Jack London Square began as a little clusters and you'd wander through and everything. The reason I'm saying all that is we're talking about a district, but in fact it's a district where the name is being taken from something that never quite worked. And it's still kind of connected to the waterfront. So the point of the preamble is, realistically, to what extent is this area a district? And to what extent is it a jostle of different uses within a single boundary?
I'll start. I mean, I think the physical barriers that Rachel already mentioned, I think absolutely give this neighborhood the sense of being a district more than most districts. And so maybe you could argue that's sort of a good thing. It creates a very well-defined boundary. But then the downside is everything we've talked about a little bit about how cut off you are from the rest of the city, issues around access and entryways and gateways. But I think we should think about how we can take advantage of those sort of the fact that it is a neighborhood so organically. And I agree, I remember the Willows very well too, having grown up out there. And I think that's what's sort of funny is I think we don't want to go out and build a new experience that is put upon this place. I think we want to build on what's in Jack London so the experience and the landscape of this place becomes the draw. So I think but I think we should absolutely play up on the fact that it is a defined district and that it is that.
And I think within that district, it's unusual. I think it's a hybrid. You have the organic element of Jack London, where it was old industrial, and that is a real asset to this area. That's what makes it funky, attractive, unique. Just looking at the cranes of the port, it's just a beautiful, iconic symbol for Oakland. And it's only Oakland. I don't know any other place, well, maybe the other port towns of Long Beach or something, but it's really Oakland, and people take a lot of pride in that. It was something that stood out for me so vividly when I first moved here about a year and a half ago. Then you have the new Jack London, where people took a lot of risks, spent a lot of money, put a lot of time and effort into it to try and create a there. And one wonders, should we have let the organic piece just keep going? And I don't mean that to disparage the people who invested a lot of money here, because they were really trying to create a good thing, like Harbor Place in Baltimore. But if we had just let the organic piece continue to grow with its funkiness, could we have gotten to the same place where it would become a destination retail entertainment center, kind of like Uptown in some ways? Part of that is what was there, the Fox, Paramount, but then there's the new. So we are where we are, and I think we have to keep building on the organic piece. People still want loft apartments. They want kind of the grunge industrial side. And yet we have new buildings, and more are coming. And how do we do that in a way that complements what's already here? We have the Produce Mart, which is really iconic for Jack London as well. And as that transitions, and maybe they want to think about new places, what would that become? I think as a community, we'd have to work together to cherish what we love about it and to think new and what can be there. So I think that's the tension of what's going on here.
You know, this question about is it a district, I'm interested to know, there are a lot of people here tonight, and I'm really amazed at how many of you are here. How many of you live in the Jack London district? Okay, that's a lot. How many of you work in, okay? To me, that's amazing. You wouldn't see that in too many places. And if we were here 10 years ago, you might have asked us if we thought this was an urban village, because that was a phrase that people were using. It's actually a phrase that's about 50 years old, but to me that's what this is, more so than almost anywhere else in the Bay Area. So we can debate whether it's a district or whether it's artificial, but it's real, judging from what I see here and people putting their hands up. And that's not something to be messed with or taken lightly.
Well, I think the district does have some very real boundaries and always did. The freeway, the water, the Lake Merritt Channel, Brooklyn Basin kind of beginning on the other, to the east or south, depending on how you call it, and butting up against West Oakland and a little bit heavier industrial as you move towards the Bay Bridge area. And I think that's a huge benefit, because I think we all take a little pride in having this unique characteristic neighborhood thing that we can call different from the other neighborhoods. And Oakland's full of fantastic neighborhoods. It's a city of neighborhoods. But this is, I think, maybe other than Uptown, one of the few that kind of mixes everything in the same area. I mean, you've got great neighborhoods that are primarily residential with a little commercial stringing the exterior along the boundaries. And you've got other districts that are predominantly industrial with a few kind of artist live work lofts sprinkled in between. And here we have all of it going on. You've got this kind of, I remember when Gary, I don't know if Gary Connect's in the room, in the house tonight. No, what?
You'd hear him if he was here.
Yeah, it's true, we would hear him. One of the early pioneers here in the whole kind of artist live work loft, when there was hardly anyone doing that, and the artists came first, and it kind of has morphed into this great mix of newcomers and some of the older uses, and Michael and his fantastic shared workspace concept going on. So I think that's what makes it different, is we've got a little bit of everything.
Go ahead.
Well, I was also going to, I did a quick look at some of the demographic data and the census data, and the population of this district has almost doubled in 10 years. So in 2000, it was about 2,200 people. Today it's a little more than 4,000. That's according to the census. The number of jobs down here has also been kind of growing. And I'm sort of wondering, I know there's some of the folks who own some of the restaurants down here, but I think one of the reasons that we are starting to see an uptick in the number of businesses and the success of some of the restaurants along the water is that we have both an increase of residents, but we also have the daytime population providing a whole lunch audience for these restaurants. I mean, I think Sungevity is probably putting, 300 people, 400 people work there. So I think because we are this neighborhood is sort of so cut off, I think that mix of uses is actually even more crucial to keep the sort of retail viable and healthy. And then I think so it's sort of like, as we think about how we want to grow, let's keep an eye on both increasing actually the jobs as well as the people if we want to continue this critical mass. And certainly as we get to maybe wanting to see a grocery store in this neighborhood, which I know we all do, what does that take? What does that look like? And I think it's going to be a mix.
I wanted to ask a question for Pam that's a very Pam-specific question, but can kind of go from there. Talking about the Jack London waterfront complex, you can't do residential there. Right now it's muddling along. It's doing pretty good. Barnes and Noble is turning into
awesome.
bowling and bocce. But it's still got some empty storefronts. And I mean, what can happen there? What's the port thinking about with?
Well, so for those of you who haven't heard this spiel yet, the port is a trustee on behalf of the state of California, which goes back to how we gained title to our property. It was granted to us by the state back actually when the port was formed, 1927. It was originally given to the city, et cetera, a long history, very cool history if you're interested. With those grants came certain restrictions on what we can use our property for. We can never put a grocery store on there, so headed off that question right there. Or women's shoes, or it would be there already. Or handbags, trust me.
So it has to be like water-oriented
retail
okay.
and restaurants, hence the predominance of eating and dining establishments, and bars are ironically always allowed on the waterfront. I wonder why. And so there's a very narrow basket of retail uses allowed, frankly. And so within that basket, I think we've learned a lesson that building a ton of retail isn't so smart if there's only a few different categories you can use. And I think that was a hard-learned lesson for the port, and maybe took 15, 20 years. But we're smarter today. Hopefully we'll be smarter even tomorrow. But that's the reality of it, is you really can't do that on port lands. You can do them on the lands across the street, which is where we're excited to see that transition happen.
Right, okay.
So we have 2 new residentially zoned properties just below the Embarcadero, which had never happened before, and we're hoping that will add those rooftops for new shoppers for the retail.
And looking ahead a decade, it was interesting, Kelley saying how the population's about doubled and the number of jobs has gone up a lot. I was surprised, but I guess the building across the street's pretty big, so that was interesting. Realistically, what do you see as the possibility for change in the next decade? But also, realistically, what doesn't happen? I mean, this is very San Francisco-centric. Back in around 2003, I was writing about the rezoning to upzone the area around Rincon Hill to bring in a lot more housing. And at that time, the only thing down there that was more than an old warehouse was the Hills Plaza project, about 16 stories. And the people who lived in the upper floors of Hills Plaza, which is the housing portion, didn't want the development to happen. That is a shock. But I was talking to one of the people about it, and I asked her, well, what would you like to see happen because Hills Plaza was there, and then there was a big parking lot that now has 2 towers where there should be 1. But people don't listen to the urban design critic. But I asked her, well, what would you like to see on that lot? And she said, well, a Safeway would be great. And I could kind of understand her point of view, but the likelihood of Safeway deciding we'll build a big suburban shopping center at SPUR and Folsom Street, where the population is about 183 people nearby, it was never going to happen. So I'm being kind of curious, what kind of changes do you see coming, but also realistically, does there become a big enough thing for a grocery store, or realistically things like that probably don't happen? Are there other things that probably don't happen?
Well, actually, I wanted to think a little bit about what kind of change is going to happen here when Brooklyn Basin, the very large project, 3,100 units, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with, about a half a mile down the waterfront comes online, because we know that's going to happen. They're going to be breaking ground on the vertical construction next year. And thinking about this question about the services and the amenities, I think Brooklyn Basin and that population could start pushing this neighborhood to look a little more appealing to grocery stores and to the kind of actually day-to-day services that you don't have so much of, because those folks aren't going to be any more close to a grocery store than you are. And I think about the Whole Foods that's up in Adams Point. That Whole Foods is one of the best in the state right now. It's doing phenomenal. And they located right there because they had all of that Adams Point density to travel to the store. But they're actually now, they draw from the entire Highway 13 corridor, the 580 corridor. They're actually drawing from a pretty huge geography. So I think we also have to think about what's happening around Jack London, and then you guys become the sort of interesting place to be for these new developments and all this growth happening maybe down the waterfront. So I would just put that out there. As we're thinking about change in Jack London, let's think about what's happening just south of here.
And I would add to that, to harken back to what Rachel said earlier about the freeway and what to do with the freeway and underneath the freeway to make it more inviting and less of a barrier. Because it's not just connection to Brooklyn Basin, but it's connection to downtown and to that population center there and to goings-on there as well. And that's really where I think if the freeway can be solved and can become more of an attraction rather than a barrier, that really opens up a lot of possibilities for these sort of neighborhood serving amenities. And I just want to say something about a grocery store. A big suburban style Safeway, as we all know, is not the only model. And there are lots of other models. And as I look at this crowd that's here, it looks to me like a crowd that could support some sort of decent, smaller grocery. I know of Canyon Market in San Francisco and others. So I think all of those, especially as Brooklyn Basin comes online and the neighborhood gets better connected to the other side of the freeway, become real possibilities.
Typically, grocers want 25,000 people within, say, a mile, and they want rich people because they make the most money off of the luxury goods, the prepared foods, the expensive chocolates, the wines, all that kind of stuff. So just realistically, that's what they're looking for. So the more people who live here within the mile range, it's going to help. So that's what I would add to that.
What about the public realm? I mean, I come from the outside. I'm the good little urban guy, so I bicycle down Mandela Parkway and then curve up 3rd or whatever it is. So it's kind of funky that sidewalks come and go and the street intersections come and go and there are some weird twists and turns. But I don't live here. Does the kind of clumsiness, is that part of the fabric from here on out, or is there do you think you can kind of keep the fabric interesting and kind of a mix of uses, but also bring in a bit more in terms of green and a bit more in terms of orderly sidewalks or whatever? I mean, is that an issue worth pursuing?
Yeah, I think the key is beauty. People are always attracted to beauty, and that's why I mentioned the gateways when we started talking, that people know where they're wanted and where they're invited and where they feel safe. And beauty always wins every time. So it can still be funky, you can still have those strange sidewalks maybe, or even a few potholes, but if it's beautiful, people will still come there. I've seen so many cities that people will manage those cobblestones that are a little uncomfortable, but they know where they want to be, so.
People are attracted to interesting, too. And Jack London has buckets of interesting. And what you call funky or disorganized, that wasn't the exact word, but it's a fine grain and it's interesting and it's something that doesn't exist in too many other places in the Bay Area, and that's great.
Yeah, I agree totally with what Robert said, and I think one of the things that's so great about Oakland is that for a city, there's still this sense of discovery in Oakland. Like, you find things you didn't even know were there. It looks like an auto parts shop, but it's really a brewery in the backyard, and there's artist studios where you least expect them, and this is the kind of fabric that actually reveals itself a little bit slowly, and I think that's really true of this neighborhood, and that's, I think, part of the appeal and what San Francisco is losing, frankly. So I think we still do want to live with a slightly disorganized fabric. I'm totally fine with maybe a few sidewalks that start and stop, but not too many. But I think that's another way to talk about it. That sense of discovery that comes in an urban environment is something that's super appealing about this neighborhood, and we've got to figure out how to grow it, but also preserve it.
And just one or two last questions, and then I want to go to the audience. Kind of curious, what are other places that you might suggest, as people are traveling or in the Bay Area, look at as places that either are cautionary tales with regard to how this area can grow and change, or are kind of signals that, we can kind of do this right? And that includes the notion of port and other uses coexisting. So I'm kind of curious if any of you have thoughts. Robert mentioned Granville Island as an example up in Vancouver, but any thoughts about kind of places to look to, like, we could steal a few good ideas from that place, or that's the road we don't want to go down?
Well, in terms of the balance of, port-centric view here, interestingly enough, you wouldn't think off the top of your head these have a lot of comparisons, but Savannah, Georgia, has replaced Oakland. We used to be the 4th busiest port in the nation. We're now 5th. And we were bumped by Savannah. Who knew, right? Well, another old city that's got kind of a mix of industrial as well as kind of this historic, a little bit cutesy and charming for my own taste, but very pretty. maybe a little more perfect than we'll ever be, and I think that's okay. But I do think absolutely this era of separating activities with rigid lines, and that's industrial over there and do not cross, and this is residential, is gone. And I think the cities that have managed that well in Europe, as well as in our own country, are the ones that are thriving. And I think Oakland has gotten that. And I think we've done that pretty well, organically or not. We'll take credit for it, whether it happened despite planning or not. But I think this district kind of exemplifies a very good success story in that direction.
I think a good neighborhood, a little closer to look at, is the Dogpatch neighborhood in San Francisco, which is seeing a huge influx of new housing coming online. Dogpatch is actually, it's sort of between Hunters Point and Mission Bay and South of Market, and right near the waterfront. And there it's been it was very much an industrial neighborhood with always a small amount of housing. The housing's now increasing, but the land use controls there have been devised in a way where they still allow a lot of light industrial uses. They allow light industrial on the ground floor in a lot of the buildings. You often see light industrial uses rolling up their doors and setting up almost pop-up retail, selling their wares, whether it's bags or food or different things. But I think it's an interesting model, particularly maybe from a land use perspective, on how to do this, how to try to figure out how to balance this so that the vitality, so letting some of the mix of uses be their most vital selves. So we don't have to overly restrict the light industrial so they can't reveal themselves, but we make sure that we're still allowing some housing to be built, because that's what gets people on the street and gets the coffee shops to show up, and they've got some new parks in that neighborhood. So that's a real neat one I think I don't know, would you agree with that, Dogpatch and Jack London?
Yeah, it's got a lot of housing coming. You guys think there's too much housing coming here? The people in Dogpatch are just stunned. San Francisco did like a 20-year plan for the central waterfront area, like Potrero Hill and Dogpatch, and then this whole hyper boom hit, and like kind of 20 years of anticipated growth is all in a line at City Hall to get a planner right now. So planning does have its challenges.
Just to let folks know, we're going to soon embark on a specific plan for the downtown, and it will include Jack London, which we see as downtown, and it'll be a big C, if you will, because we've already studied the Chinatown Lake Merritt area. So it'll be basically from the water up to Grand, 980 over to Lake Merritt estuary, but carving out the piece that we already studied for Lake Merritt. And so we need to in that process, really engage the community, ask what you want and what's working, what's not working, and collectively create that vision. And we need things that we can do the first year, the 5th year, the 10th year, the 20th year, and really be thinking about those long-term, bold goals, but also those little things we could be getting done right now, like that underpass at 880. And back to when you were asking about cities, John, I think Charleston, South Carolina is a great example where, I mean, now you look at it, it seems so perfect, but I'm telling you, it was a dump like 20, 30 years ago in parts. And one advantage is they've had the same mayor for 40 years. And his longest running mayor in America. He's just announced he's not going to run again. But by keeping his eyes on the prize, he created a vision with the community, and he kept that vision going and going and going. And it was an industrial sort of rough area, and they kept, the great features of industry, but also created amazing, beautiful public spaces for people. And that was a real key.
A specific question or final?
I don't know if you had any places to suggest. Or?
In addition to Granville Island, I'll stick with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, what I think I want to do is shift over to questions and kind of, just kind of if you have a question aimed at a specific person, say so, but also aim it at me, and I'll just kind of keep things moving along. And I think microphones will be ambling through the crowd, and there clearly is no shortage of questions.
One hand raised here.
Okay,
A
we'll
hand
start.
raised here, so we'll speak into the microphone very closely.
Okay, so my name is Murray. I live at the Bond, a couple of blocks up the street here. Been here almost a year. So I see a lot of issues. I think that this neighborhood has incredible potential. I think that the freeway underpass thing needs to be solved because I think that it's an artificial barrier between Broadway East and Broadway West, which would be considered Jack London Square. So I look at a town, so I lived on the coast for 7 years in Pacifica before I came here. And I look at towns like Half Moon Bay, which have a very interesting produce, natural food store called New Leaf, which is, I think, just been bought by a corporation in Oregon, and they have a very small store in Haight Street in San Francisco. But the Half Moon Bay community, not very many people live there. And I'm thinking of looking and say, we have 4,000 people now. We're going to have Brooklyn Basin. We're going to have a couple new projects. We're going to probably be in the 10 to 15,000 people range shortly. Why would we not be trying to attract this corporation that owns New Leaf into bringing a store into the area here, for instance?
Well, one question, I would assume Brooklyn Basin must have some larger retail pods built into it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Next question. If you thought you were going home at 7:30, you can still go, but we're staying.
Hi guys, actually I have more of a comment than a question, I think. As a long-term Oakland resident and new to Jack London, coming from Grand Lake Shore area, we're talking about the freeway here. The freeway here does not need much. There's not a distinguishing line between Lake Merritt and Lakeshore Grand neighborhood. But the difference is between here and there, that area is clean, it's safe for the most part. It's not scary like it is sometimes here walking back and forth. I don't think it takes as much as you all think it might to get it to be less of a barrier than it is.
Okay. Next, we're going to take that, and why don't you go over this direction just to get him and then work the way back, just so you guys don't feel forgotten about over here.
Hi guys, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on an Oakland Coliseum being built here. What do you guys think? Is that feasible for Jack London, or is it not going to happen just because when you look at San Francisco and the Warriors trying to build on their waterfront, it didn't happen. So, I mean, do you see us following along that same line where it's just not going to happen?
Do you mean the ballpark going in, or
Here
do you
at
mean
Howard Terminal?
Okay.
There was talk about the Oakland Coliseum
Got it.
being built there, but now they're talking about it being at the original Coliseum. So
Yeah, we don't know because
No.
they are still negotiating with the Raiders, and then following that will be the negotiation with the A's.
right.
I wouldn't write it off. I think it's a very viable site. It's in an industrial area, so it's not like you're moving into someone's neighborhood. So you'll be next to Jack London, but not in it. The real issues are access, and again, that's where the freeway comes in. It's a blessing and a curse. You have 200,000 cars a day on the 880, so that can help because people can get to you, but that you got to get over railroad tracks and around this and all that. There's also not a BART stop here. So then the question is, would people walk about a half mile from 12th Street to get there? And they might, but that's where beauty comes in. If it doesn't feel like a welcoming street that you want to walk from and to, are people going to do it? So that's our job, to try and make that the best experience possible and maximize it so retailers and restaurateurs can also benefit from game nights. And so I wouldn't write it off. I actually think it's a good idea.
And would that be on Portland?
Yeah, I'll take
Oh, sorry,
that
Pam.
question.
Yeah.
I'm a big A's fan, by the
All
way.
right.
Longtime A's fan. Yeah, and Raiders. I'll say that quieter for the obvious reasons. You know, we're in a contract right now with the development interest group, local folks who we're going to try and build an A's stadium development on that site. The term of that agreement is up very soon, so I would say stay tuned. And even though if it doesn't happen in this kind of flip of the switch, I think I would agree with Rachel. The site is very much alive and being looked at for different types of uses. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're not having this conversation again sometime soon.
Quick question before we go to the question a quick question for all of you before your question. How many of you, fast forward 5 years, would like to see a ballpark up here with the A's playing in it?
Whoa.
How many of you would not like to see that happen? Okay, interesting. Great. And now we move on to our regularly scheduled question.
My name's John, and I live in the district, and I work at the port, and I worked for one of our former mayors for a while. And so at least for 20 years, we've been talking about the underpass. People have run and said that they were going to fix the underpass. And I've been in those meetings. I said I was going to fix the underpass. And my question to the city people is, why now and how now?
Well, I got here as fast as I could. Let me tell you something about the underpass. You're dealing with three very tough entities. You got Caltrans, you got the police department, because they're right next door at the former jail, and Public Works. It's like dealing with the Pentagon, the FBI, and the CIA. But I think that we could engage everybody in a conversation where we find out, okay, what truly is a barrier? Is there a legal barrier to anything? Like people say, well, you can't even paint the freeway and you can't do this. So let's just find out what is and what isn't. And that's where I think strong political leadership comes in, which is why I cited Charles, South Carolina with Joe Riley. I mean, he was the guy who just made things happen. If Joe Riley was here, that thing would be fixed up. So I have full faith in our mayor-elect that she will take this issue on, and if she has to call the head of Caltrans or talk to the Public Works folks, I think we can get there. But we just have to, A, have a plan, a good one that you all buy into. It's not about the money. We can find the money. And make it exciting. It's something that's very visionary and that is really, truly going to help everyone involved.
But I'm going to cut in real quick and just a quick answer. Realistically, how much can you do? There's nothing sadder than when you go under an underpass and you see the sad little piece of public art that's there.
Oh, I know.
To enliven the, I mean, I can
It
think
is a
of
piece of public art.
Emeryville, Pleasant Hill, I'm sure lots of others.
I know.
Realistically, that's a long, dark, low space.
Yes, yeah.
It's going to take more than a little strip of LED lights.
Oh, you're not kidding. No, this is important. We'd want to bring in, top-notch designers, a real serious lighting designer, not just so we have, nice LEDs, but I mean, real, lighting that also makes it almost artistic. Experiment with maybe fabrics. Experiment with plants that could grow in the dark. I mean, I don't know. But it was funny. I was reading an article about Peter Walker, the guy who did the World Trade Center, that whole landscape for there. And I just called it. His office is right here. And I called him. I said, would you come look at a project for me? And he sent his right-hand guy. And he said, this is what you want me to look at? An underpass? I'm like, yep. We want you to figure out how to fix this underpass. So we need to bring in, the top architects, planners, designers.
Let's go on. Next question.
It seems, my name's Tib Tussler. It seems to me you described two things. One is organic growth of this area, which I think is very exciting. And the other one is we need more people. And those two can be in conflict, as we've seen with the buildings that were proposed along the Embarcadero. My question is, can one develop a plan? We know there's the estuary plan and that sort of died, but as part of the planning process, can you somehow deal with those two and the potential conflict between them? In other words, zoning or height or something that says that tall buildings maybe go in a certain area and they don't go in other areas. Is that a realistic thing to keep the character here and still have a plan for more people?
I believe it is. It's not easy, but I believe you can do it. You bring in the right folks who have talent and vision, and you respectfully and conscientiously engage the community to find out what is it that you all love about this place? And break that down. What are those elements? Sometimes you know it when you love it, but you don't know why. And that's our jobs as planners and designers to figure out what are those elements that make it so special and build on that. And so when the new comes in, it is extremely mindful of what is here and to do it intentionally with through good design. And that's the right massing, the right scale, the right details, the right proportions, the right materials. Again, it's not easy, but it can be done. And we just have to do it carefully.
Real quick, another show of hands, and then the next question. How many of you who live in the Jack London Square area, how many of you live in a restored or renovated building? And how many of you live in a building that came from the ground up? Okay, great. Okay, next question.
Wow, good question. Hi, my name is Tracy. I really like food when I want it, so I appreciate the grocery store question. But if you would go look at Whole Foods last quarter, Instacart makes more money for them. I think they're making more revenue from Instacart than, she squinted. I'd love to hear what she thinks. But then what Whole Foods store revenue is. So I would really encourage everyone to be forward thinking about, we don't have to have a physical, massively expensive grocery store here to have our food when we come home from work. And I would love to see like a pop-up Instacart. So you just get your food. It's over here in the Ellington in this empty space anyway, waiting for me when I come home from
Can you
work.
explain what it is? I don't know what Instacart is.
Sorry, Instacart is on-demand grocery shopping for you, and they bring it to you.
So it's online shopping.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
And they go to Costco and Berkeley Bowl too.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I didn't mean to. I was using the Whole Foods example about why they decided to go to where they went. I think your idea, though, of some of these pop-up kind of, this neighborhood's particularly, I think, ripe to accommodate that because there is some vacant retail. And I think the Ellington, which I've looked into a few times, I know it has its problems with the ownership of the building and what you can do on that retail ground floor. We should talk about that. But I think that's like the perfect place for it, to have someone come maybe weekly or...
I'm not a shareholder, but I go on Instacart and I have all my food in 1 hour, and everything I want is exactly, and I'm not pitching them, I'm just saying, I think that's what's holding this district back sometimes is thinking for now, and we should be thinking of, no one needs to build another grocery store ever. And I'm sorry to be extreme, but...
Let's move on to the next.
Thank you. My name is Albert Rowe, and I have a neighborhood to refer to. It would be the Pearl District in Portland that might have some similarities to what we're dealing with here that should be looked at. And the other question is, why can't we change that grocery store can't do in the port?
Well, essentially any property owned by a Tidelands trustee has to be used for this category of uses called public trust uses. And the State Lands Commission is the arbiter of what's a public trust use and what's not. And essentially, as long as the port is the owner of the property, that inhibits those uses. And that was something that was agreed to when the port took these properties eons ago, and the state took these properties, frankly.
I think part of the idea, if it's kind of the BCDC type of regulations, is that waterfront operations have to attract people to the waterfront.
Right.
And you can kind of negotiate large deals to move things around. But the wonderful example I remember from San Francisco was someone at BCDC talking with someone at the Coastal Conservancy or State Lands, whoever BCDC answers to, they're lawyers. And it kind of came down to, so you're telling me that if we have a store selling tourist t-shirts, it's okay, but if they're selling button-down work shirts, it's not okay because one is drawing visitors, whereas the other is serving nearby residents? And the answer was, exactly. So it gets very
exactly
odd.
right.
Let's move on. Here we go. Okay.
Hi there, Zach Walt here. I'm the Chief of Staff for City Councilwoman Lynette McElhaney, who represents this area. So I first of all just wanted to say thank you for this, to the JLIT for this wonderful event, and also thank you to everyone who's here. And then to answer the last gentleman's question about, the grocery store space. The actual space for a grocery store is not our problem right now. When Ellis did their development of the garage right next to Amtrak, they built a space that's purpose-built to be a grocery store. And fortunately, it's just outside the boundary of the port's restrictions, so it's also allowed to be a grocery store. So they have been, I don't want to speak too much for them, but only to say that they have been courting grocery stores for some time for that space, which is empty and therefore costing them money, but they have been unable to attract that type of tenant because of the number of rooftops. I wanted to make one other point, which I think that I heard Robert mention the region, if you break up the Bay Area into subregions, it turns out, funnily enough, that the largest subregion in terms of population is the East Bay subregion. And if you look at what the largest center of population for that East Bay subregion is, the largest center of jobs, and unbelievably enough, the largest center of retail for that subregion are all the city of Oakland. So when you're looking at a Jack London Square that might be in the future a regional attraction, I think that we need to stop looking across the bay at San Francisco and thinking about how we can compete with San Francisco for what they do well, and start looking at what the asset that we already have. We are the jewel, the center of this region. And some districts in Oakland have already managed to capitalize on that. People have been visiting Rockridge for years to go dining. Recently, the Uptown was discovered as a place to recreate and eat and go to bars, and people are coming from Walnut Creek and Concord and Richmond to go out to bars there now. So know your audience if your goal is to be a regional player, and I think that, and follow to some degree what's happened in those other districts that have been successful in doing so. I also wanted to say that I think Plank is probably the turning point for the Jack London district in terms of being successful in the region, and I'm certainly hopeful that that will be the case. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Next. Oh, that's right. Okay.
It's kind of a question and a comment. My agency is at 420 3rd Street, and we were the group that put the 2 large murals right next to the Oakland Grill, if any of you saw that. And so really it's about how we could look at Jack London as possibly being a destination for some incredibly fine art murals. I mean, it has worked for San Francisco, it's worked for some other places. And so I'm just putting that out there about having community input. What does it mean with the images? We've been doing some research on the history that's here. And the produce section is actually, I believe it's a historical designated, section. And so what does that mean to represent that particular area? So I just wanted to say, that's a project that we're working with the Jack London Improvement District on, and ask the residents as well as the workers, to give us your ideas too. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is Steve Lowe. I've been living down here for 25 years. Used to live right across the street, actually, as Everett and Jones was getting built out by the Puccini family, who was the one that really started the Jack London Square years and years ago in the late 40s and early 50s. And unfortunately, those guys aren't around anymore to relate the history of this area and how it first developed, but maybe one of these days we'll write a script about it. What we've found over the years, because I've been involved with the Jack London District Association, before that the Jack London Neighborhood Association and the West Oakland Commerce Association, and been on a number of different planning efforts for the area, is that there's rarely any resolve uptown to see these plans through. We had the produce market all ready to go onto the Army base about 15, 20 years ago, And we couldn't get enough support from City Hall to make sure that that was going to happen, even though we had all sorts of endorsements from all over the town, mostly the CBDG groups and so forth. So the question is whatever plan we come up with will need to have teeth in it, so that it's more like what was happened with the Maritime Air Quality Improvement Program, where we had regional buy-in, so that there won't be steps back by folks at City Hall who say, gee, we just don't want to do that anymore. Thanks for all the work. Thanks for the years that you put in on the estuary plan, or even the General Plan Congress, where I first met Pam. You know, we really
I was 10. I was 10.
You were, but you did a great job. You still had enthusiasm. So I think that's the problem here, is we'll come up with a vision for the area that'll be great. We'll put some kind of a monster building over the freeway, and that'll absorb, as you said, Rachel, the feeling that you're going into a great building instead of under a sloppy overpass. But there has to be some guarantee that the planning that comes out of this is going to be followed through on. And I think part of the way to do that is to get Caltrans involved because of all the damage they've done to this city, and make them pay their fair share.
Okay. Any questions? Well,
This gentleman.
okay.
I just have one question. It's about what seems to me the 900-pound gorilla in the bay. I drive to the city and I see, I don't know how many buildings are going up, to like just the dozens and dozens of huge cranes. And I look at the Oakland City landscape and there's none. I don't think there's one crane I've seen anywhere in Oakland. And I'm just wondering why. Just
Yeah, the question was, why are there so many cranes in San Francisco building and there's no cranes in Oakland, which is completely true. It's not your imagination. I don't think there has only been a few dozen market rate housing units come online since 2009. It's sort of a real simple economics. You know, our land values are cheaper than San Francisco, our land costs, but not that much cheaper. Construction costs are almost the same. San Francisco's rents are more than double, both the residential and the commercial rents. So for a long time, even just over the first year, I think Rachel and I were both here, we just had developers saying it just doesn't pencil. In the last 3 months, suddenly it's starting to pencil in certain places, in the core of Uptown, right? And I think maybe places down here that the rent growth is going up at a pretty high rate. The reason the rent growth is going up so high is because more and more people are coming to Oakland and there's no supply to house them. So we're having huge rent pressures. So I think if we're also sort of interested in thinking about sort of, you know, equity and how we sort of make sure we keep prices a little bit more reasonable, that market rate housing production really has to go. But the basic answer is just that the projects weren't just financially feasible. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, you could just make so much more money there, but there is hope. Thank God for Mike Gilmetti and for John Protopappas and other small developers who are 100% committed to Oakland. And Mike he has started Brooklyn Basin. So those 3,100 housing units, where we've approved plans, they have started the infrastructure, they've torn down, you know, the old sheds and whatnot, and they are going, and they have a major developer who they've gotten involved. And we can thank Mayor Kwan for bringing that a major Chinese investment. That was EB5 money, $1.5 billion. And Gilmetti has started on the Hive, 100 new units up by the near 23rd and Broadway. Then we have Protopappas, who is in West Oakland, and sort of the Oakland-Emeryville border. So we have 11,000 housing units in the pipeline. And these people many of them are just ready to build. They're going through CEQA, they're finding financing, just getting regular approval. So I think it's about to pop. If the economy holds, we're about to pop.
Let's kind of because we're coming toward 8, if people if you can keep the questions and comments short and we can keep the answers short, we can probably hit another half dozen or so of you.
My name is Tommy Merzwinski. I'm interested in keeping some light industrial in this district. How do we do that?
Well, we have industrial zone land that abuts this this area, and we too want that to remain because we want the jobs, we want the uniqueness that brings, and the the funkiness, as it were. So yes, we're committed.
Hi, I'm Ben Delaney. I'm a resident and been here about 10 years, and also the president of the Jack London District Association. And in regard to the question about why there isn't more building there, there's a perception that Oakland is really hard to work in, that the city government itself is a pain in the butt, that the port has been the big gorilla in the room and very hard to deal with. Now, I know there's a new administration in the port. We're about to get a new administration in the city. But what can we do to make Oakland appealing, easy to work with, streamline the process so that people can actually do the work that we all want to see happen here?
Well, with respect to development, I assume your question was about approving development. I'm not sure, Ben. The port is certainly a big gorilla, but I don't know we get too involved in development anymore. We don't have a development authority here, but I will tell you, one of the big education pieces that we have to do a better job in is talking more about the regulatory restrictions on our land. I don't think we've done a good job of that in the past, and we left folks with an impression that you could do women's shoe stores and Target stores and grocery stores when we should have been much clearer about that. And I'm not sure if I'm capturing your point or not, but I do think that education and culture at the port has changed, at least in the past 10 years or so folks are more articulate and knowledgeable about that and can normally curb those kinds of questions early off. I hate it when someone drags you on for years and then tells you at the end, oh, that was never going to happen. I agree with you. Certainty is everything.
I have a question. Hi, my name is Jay Scholl. I've been a resident in Oakland for 21 years. I echo the sentiments of the gentleman just expressed in terms of difficulty of dealing or doing business in Oakland. But compared to San Francisco, that's a true opportunity for Oakland because it's not easy over there either, and probably more difficult. So
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, so I think there's a great opportunity for Oakland to separate itself from San Francisco in that regard. But to the point about Mission Bay and Dogpatch, and even I'll throw in Mid-Market, the city was instrumental in actually offering incentives and inducements that would lower the cost to do business in those locations. Is there anything on the boards from Oakland's perspective, the city's perspective, that's going to go down that path for Jack London or Midtown or anywhere else here in the city?
Yeah, both Mission Bay and Mid-Market benefited from payroll tax exemptions, which the City of Oakland doesn't have. It's one of the first things we looked into when we got here. It was in the powers of redevelopment. We were able to fund 30% of the housing units in Mission Bay are affordable, paid for by tax increment, a tool that was taken away from us 2 years ago. Redevelopment was one of the most powerful sort of ways to help cities negotiate what they wanted from developers with their offer of tax increment financing to pay for public benefits and infrastructure and affordable housing. We do not have those tools anymore, and cities up and down the state are scrambling to answer that exact question. What is the next creative package of things we can offer to induce the kind of development that we want to see and extract what we want to see and be at the negotiating table as a powerful partner, because our most powerful tools were taken away from us 2 years ago by the governor. But that said, I mean, we're exploring all sorts of things. I mean, the City of Oakland does have a couple incentives on the books. There's a sales tax rebate. We offer some relief on business tax payments. The business tax thing isn't a huge one, nothing like we used to have. We're actually kind of focusing more on new programs to help support small business and micro entrepreneurs. And we just started a program called Kiva Zip that provides loans to very small business. I think there was something about the fabric of Oakland where I think we'll get more bang for our buck by supporting small business and helping the businesses that are already here grow rather than trying to entice a huge new company to Oakland. So we have been focused in that area. But if you want to ask that question at a forum like this in a year, we might have a lot more to tell you once we go through the budget process. But it is something every city is struggling with right now.
Okay, next question.
Aloha, my name is Clinton Hannes. I'm an ambassador from the Hawaiian Islands, and I also represent San Francisco. I've been there most of my life, as was 4 generations of my family. I've also been a resident in Oakland and most of the Bay Area, including all the way from Southern California all the way up to Mount Shasta. My concern here as a youth-oriented person here, considering the rest of the constituents here, no disrespect intended there, is I see things as, throughout my life, as a structure of being out of order. I think that the real estate agencies and the real estate interests need to follow the interests of the people. Now, Oakland is an American modeled city and has always been and always will be. Slated to be #1 in the United States, if not focused as #1 place in the world. You have nothing but artists and amazing, talented people in these areas. They are the content. Content comes first. My question to you is, what are corporations and our government going to do to support your average working person and your average working artist to proliferate into real estate, to proliferate into holding down space? Because I'll tell you what's going on here in Jack London Square, and Jack London being a traveler himself and a poet, okay, is that I live in Oahu and Maui and all of the 808 Islands, and all of our western shores are being attacked on an ecological level, on an economic level, by forces that are beyond our normal constituency of Americans. What are you going to do to protect American interests here and keep the waterfront here that's being destroyed potentially by ecological impact, similar to Honolulu, where there's an attack in Kaka'ako building towers to the sky? What are you guys going to do to ensure that we can keep this ours and not somebody else's?
Well, that's why with the specific plan coming up, we will be engaging the community, hearing what the community wants, what quality of life, what is appropriate density, and all that. We take that issue very seriously, so that's the answer to that. Do you have more?
I think, yeah, just maybe 1 or 2 last quick questions, okay?
Picking up on a previous comment, can you talk a little bit about Skyline? And I know that's a bit of a loaded
Talk
question.
about
Skyline in Jack London.
tall buildings.
So the 2 that were just approved, one is of, I believe, 15 stories, maybe 14, the same height as the Ellington. And the other one, which is past where Haven is, I guess that way, that would be, I believe, 20, possibly 22 stories. And right now that's south of Embarcadero. Those are the last 2 vacant lots to be developed in the core. So that will be that. Going north of Embarcadero, we will be looking at that in the specific plan to, again, decide what is appropriate. If we want more people living here, more activity on the street, more people supporting what could be a grocery store or whatever, you really need people. And if Oakland's going to continue to grow and prosper, more people here, more contributing to the tax base, supporting all the services we want. So in my view, we need to keep growing in the right way. So that's what we're looking at now, and we will be engaging with you on what is the appropriate height. But we're not seeing many developers able to do high-rise right now. The 5-story buildings is really all they're able to financially do.
A real quick question, because I want to get at least one more question out here. How many development sites are there really within the Jack London area in terms of kind of blocks that could be redone at large scale?
Well, if the produce mart became available, that's like 3, not 3 blocks, but maybe 3 half blocks. Okay. I mean, that's a big chunk of real estate there.
And
I can't answer
the kind of parking lot retail, like where Bed Bath & Beyond is and things, or is that Port? No, okay.
That's not Port. Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but
I mean. No, I was just kind of curious. Okay, now you've already asked a question, so last question.
I'm probably your newest Jack London resident. I moved here in July. There may be
welcome.
some newer. I came from San Francisco. one of the reasons is all the high rises. I selected Jack London Square because there really aren't any. The Ellington, as you mentioned, is the highest. Recently, I went to the city council meeting where that was approved for the one by the Haven, which is a 300-foot skyscraper in an area that has nothing else that's, you know, more than 8 stories. How is that deemed appropriate development?
No, it's not 300 story. It's not 300.
300 feet. It's just under 300 feet.
Okay. Well, the one right on Broadway, which is the core, that's the 14, 15 story one.
Talking about the one down by the landing?
Yep. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's differing opinions on what is appropriate height, and you know, this was what we engaged in with the community. We had differing viewpoints on it, and
okay. We're okay. But if it's going to shift into an issue over the one development project, let's wrap it up real quick. I mean, clearly there's a lot of opposition to it. So you didn't talk to, not a unanimous thing, but I mean, it's like the thing we're ending around 8 rather than shifting into a discussion of those projects. But city point of view, and it's a fair question, if the existing heights are in the kind of 4 to 6 story range, why pop it up to 20?
I think it can work in several places. Like if you look at the Broadway and Grand area, a new building went up that is probably 175 feet. I think it's been an enhancement to the neighborhood. It's next to buildings that are 1, 2, 3 stories. So I don't think tall, bad, short, good. I think you need to look at the context. You need to look at how it's designed. We were very clear with the developer that the quality of the development had, you know, that we were going to be really scrutinizing this during design review. How did the ground floor meet the street? That is really, really key, because that's how most people are perceiving it, at least up close. What will it look like when those 200,000 cars go by from the highway? Can it be an iconic structure to welcome people to Jack London, like the Trib Tower is, like City Hall is, like the Cathedral Building are, all tall buildings. And I don't know that it has to be a bad thing. We will have more people living here, more investment in the community. It is off to the side. It's not right in the core. So yes, there are many differing viewpoints on this, and we definitely respect them, and that is that's why we want to do this specifics plan, so we're not reacting to project by project. We're stepping back, creating a vision, deciding on the economics, the aesthetics, the quality of life, and all that.
And last show of hands, how many of you are comfortable with the idea of a 20-story building going up in Jack London Square? Okay, and how many of you are not comfortable with the idea of a 20-story building going up? And how many of you, I'm guessing the other third, how many of you don't have a real strong feeling one way or the other about it per se? Okay. And there's some who didn't vote it. So you've got your work cut out for you on the specific plan.
Thank you, John.
I think it's about 8 o'clock now. Okay, then I think we will wrap up. They're all up here, so you can come up, you can continue the tower discussion.
So thank everyone for coming, and I want to thank the owners of XOXO nightclub, or the new operators here. This is soon to be open, and we can all come back and enjoy a drink. They've been so gracious and hosted us. And also the board, I should thank the board members of the Jack London Improvement District, many of whom are
and
here.
And again, super quick, as someone who lives in Berkeley and works in San Francisco, I'm so impressed by the turnout and the thoughtfulness of all the questions and statements.
And John, thank you. Really great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.